Medical innovation starts with medical discussion. Talking about the future and what comes next with Project Medtech.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lindsay Deneen, Director of Marketing and Engagement at Project Medtech, and welcome to another episode of the Project Medtech podcast. If we can help you in any way, or you would like to suggest a future guest, you can email us at info@projectmedtech.com. If conversations like this are helpful, that's exactly why we bring people together at our signature events, the Midwest Showcase, the Startup Symposium, and Coming to America. For more on our events that include networking, education, and pitch competitions for startups, check them out at www.projectmedtech.com. We even have sponsorship options if your company is also dedicated to accelerating medical technology to impact patient lives. So reach out today to get involved. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Ward Law. Ward Law Office LLC is a boutique law firm specializing in the practice of patent and trademark law. They are committed to providing inventors, entrepreneurs, and businesses of all types with personal and professional services and are flexible to meet your unique needs. It is their goal to both educate on how to secure valuable patent and trademark protection and to provide high-quality services at rates affordable to independent inventors, startups, and small businesses alike. Without further ado, let's dive in.
Okay, Brent, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with an introduction to who you are, your background in the medical device space, and kind of lead up to what you're doing now.
Yeah, no, thanks. I'll keep this brief and we can kind of, continue to dive in as we go. But Brent Lavin, I'm based here in Phoenix, Arizona. We've been here about 15 years. But I started out my professional life as an engineer, doing design work and innovation in the printed circuit board and system design area. But I quickly realized I didn't really want to be an engineer that way the rest of my life. But I found my way into medtech through a patient experience, and then have been fortunate to spend the last 20 years really in the product management function. And so started that journey with GE Healthcare, moved out here to Phoenix for the company C.R. Bard at the time. And then we were purchased by BD, by Becton Dickinson, and had a great career in product management and portfolio management, a couple of M&A transactions that I think we'll probably dig into a little bit. But recently in the last 4 months, I've split out on my own and founded Ironwood Medtech Partners in order to help early stage Series A and Series B companies build commercial logic into every stage of their innovation. So pleasure to be here. And I love medtech and I love the details and business of medtech. So looking forward to this.
Yeah, super cool. I think I'm going to work in reverse order on this one. And because I want to talk about your experience with GE, Bard, and then obviously BD.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. So you spent a career in strategics. You find Ironwood. It's only been 4 months. What's been the biggest shock factor, I guess, in terms of how some of these Series A and B companies are operating versus, what you were used to in the strategic? And then also walk me through the similarities.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to start with a little bit of the similarities because I think there's a misconception, that strategics have very narrow job descriptions, a lot of specialization, and that it's a well-oiled machine, that everything just kind of works together. But the reality is much different than that. It's people that are really trying to help that business grow in whatever way possible. And a lot of times that is operating as a quote unquote startup within that larger company. And so it's really about garnering resources. So instead of going to venture capital or family offices, it's going to the corporate office, and it's making the case in order to fund a project that should move forward that can lead to growth. Another part of the strategics that I think is misunderstood a little bit is how you need to operate within the organization and gain influence when you don't have authority. And so there are a lot of voices that need to be coordinated and aligned in order to be successful in the strategic. So if I apply that mindset to the early stage venture-backed startups, there are some similarities where you've got to gain alignment with diverse stakeholders, people that may not be interested in your outcome, whether that's working with physicians, whether that's working with outside suppliers, or whether that's working with potential capital. And so there's a lot of similarities there. I would say, my biggest, I guess, shock factor with early stage is honestly some of the loose timelines and objectives that need to get clarified as you work with these early stage. Not everything can be done ASAP, and also certain things do need to be done ASAP. And sometimes I have found that early stage treats everything with urgency, and when sometimes you really just need to focus on the one thing to move the ball forward.
Yeah, that's so interesting. How did you name your company Ironwood?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I really
Yes.
like it as a branding and marketing person at heart. So I live here in Phoenix, Arizona. Ironwood is a tree out in the desert that thrives in a really harsh environment with very little water. And so not only is it in my home state, but I also thought it was analogous to Medtech, where, certainly in early stage, companies need to survive and thrive in really rough conditions, and maybe not with a lot of water. But if they can survive and continue to grow, if you navigate the complex medtech environment, you can grow to be a beautiful tree, right? And then the other piece that I would say I was really intentional about is the partners phrase. I wanted to offer a partnership with companies that I am an integrated part of the team, albeit on a fractional or project-oriented basis. Really, the success of the company is paramount to me, and I don't necessarily approach this like a consulting arrangement. I want to be a partner as part of the team.
I love that. And startups just really look for that kind of engagement with the people who are going to be working with them. Because and as they just you do have full team members, but you have a lot of fractional team members on your team, and you want them to be a part of that vision and that culture, and it's really important. And so they look for the mirror image of that in those partners. So I love to hear that, and I know a lot of startups would love to hear that. Um, Talk to me a little bit about engineer by training, right?
Yeah,
Got into the product side. You just mentioned brand, right? When we asked the
yeah.
question about Ironwood, compare and contrast those things. And I think a lot of times people may look at this and say, in the world of, there's engineers and markets and brand and product, and
Yeah.
it's always, people always focus on the differences, but how have you leveraged your unique skill set to say, oh, this is a strength from my engineering side, this is my marketing brain coming in, and this is how I can put them together?
Yeah, thanks. I think it has led to success in a highly complicated and complex market. And so, engineer by trade, I would say I grew up in small town USA, and, one stoplight in my city, and I went to college, and, I say I was good in math and science, so I checked the engineer box. And I really did love and do love innovation and strategy. And I love the scientific process. And the epiphany moment for me was as an engineering team member at a contract design manufacturing company. Was we were working with a customer that had really great technical ideas, but they didn't understand the workflow of their customer. They didn't understand how the product was going to be used in the laboratory. And so we made all of these suboptimal decisions as part of the design, struggled to get V&V across the board, and eventually got approval. But it was one of those products that was made for everybody, so it was kind of made for nobody. And in that moment, I realized I am good at helping make trade-offs and working with engineers, and I love the customer perspective to understand priorities and optimizing for a particular segment of the market. And so that's kind of where I come into product management. And I would say that my brand of product management is a very structured and scientific method to it. And I like to say that marketing is a science. Not a lot of people treat it that way, but there is science to it. And you can typically go through a process of discovery and evaluation, testing your hypothesis, and then coming out with a conclusion. And so that's just what I apply to, that intersection of engineering and marketing.
Yeah, and when you were going through engineering school, it wasn't in biomedical engineering, correct?
No, I didn't even know about it at the
Okay.
time.
Yeah.
I was an electrical engineer, and
Okay.
so I did some work in circuits
Yeah.
and actually, ICs, which was fun.
Yeah. So let's, best you can, right? Go back to you coming out as an engineer, right? You're getting into the medical space. And I know you had a different step in between there, but for those who are coming into it and they're looking to kind of go through this customer discovery space,
Mm,
what do you think is the most missed or where people miss the most in terms of customer discovery?
got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly it's not the patient, but it's got to be somewhere in that physician, health economics, supply chain, the complexities of a healthcare system. I'd love to hear from your perspective what you would say.
Yeah. Yeah. This is actually one of the reasons why I continue to stay in medtech and love it, is because I think it's a phenomenal 3D jigsaw puzzle, to really understand who are the decision makers from both a clinical standpoint and an economic standpoint, and really kind of putting all of the stakeholders into the room and solving simultaneously. And so, to your question about like what I think is most misunderstood or missed, first of all, is direct procedure observation. And I think we often shortchange that. Yeah, I saw 5 procedures. Well, if you saw 5 procedures by 2 different doctors in the same hospital, is that really a scientific sample? And you really need to kind of be strategic about where you're observing, who you're observing, and what you're looking for. So I think case observation is sometimes shortchanged. I would also say, and I come from more of the procedural suite, endovascular, peripheral vascular, physician preference driven products. We often forget about the people that are supporting the physician. And so we talk a lot to the MD, but we forget about the RN and the charge nurse and the people that are sometimes really choosing which products to put on the table, or more importantly, choosing which products they don't want to use because they're just hard or difficult, or they have a touch screen that's just really complex. And so really getting a full scale of that, I think, is sometimes shortchanged.
Awesome. I'm in the process of pulling up. There was a pause there because I was on mute as I was thundering away on my keyboard, trying to ask you my next question, which is around innovation versus features. So I
Mm,
keep a little notes section on my phone. I call it my masters in business, and as I read books, I will write some of these things down. And one of the ones was Start with Why by Simon Selleck. That's the name of the book. It's a great read. He talks about innovation versus features. And sometimes early stage companies have a problem differentiating what their core innovation is versus what are add-on features. And I think to your point earlier, you kind of mentioned, hey, this is a trade-off or this is a risk. And, you can't do that with the core innovation, but you can do that with your features. And your features are what helps you later on in commercialization. But if you don't have innovation right, you'll never get over that initial bar. I think that is a crude summary of what he talks about in the book. Read the book,
yeah.
you can look it up. But I'd be curious for you, as a product guy, as an engineer guy,
Yeah.
how do you separate those two? Because it sounds great the way when I say it out loud. How do you do
Right.
that though?
Yeah. Yeah, so let me tell you how I think about it kind of at a high level, and then I'll illustrate that through an example from about a decade ago. So um, having not thought about it in this way before, I think the innovation is the why. It is the why of what you're doing, and features and product features are the how you're going to do it, right? And so, as engineers, we typically really focus on how we're doing it. We love drawings and innovating the how, but really going back to the why. So that's the innovation. And so I'll give this example in over a decade ago, I came to CR Bard and we launched a product, fully featured product. It was the Cadillac in its category. It was optimized or enabled for all various imaging modalities to conduct this procedure under stereo, MRI, ultrasound, everything. And we launched it. We were having success in the hospital, but we were really struggling in the office-based lab. And as we did the post-launch kind of feedback, we realized that for ultrasound procedures in particular, it was overly complex. It had a touchscreen, too many options. The techs and the sports staff just didn't want to use it for what was a relatively simple procedure. And so in working with the engineers and talking through this, we brainstormed a way that we could defeature it, and we could take away the touch screen, and we could add touch push buttons. And through the 510K process, 18 months later, we were able to launch a very segmented, very specific product that was targeted at the office-based labs for ultrasound procedures. Now, I say that the innovation was simplification, and it was reducing the feature set. The how was the fact that we limited ourselves to 4 push buttons. That was just a guiding principle of if we can't do it in 4 push buttons, we're not going to do it. And that forced trade-offs through the process, and that forced arguments and discussions with engineers because they wanted to keep building. And I was the one that kept the customer perspective to say, we're not overbuilding this. It is for this person, for this purpose, 4 buttons. And we launched that product and, had some success in that segmented market. So that's just an example separating the innovation from the features.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about. I have a number of questions, but I want to start. I want to kind of circle back to your background here: GE, Bard, and then through the acquisition BD. What are some of the most important things you kind of took from each one of those experiences? Like
Yeah.
working at a large strategic, you've kind of given some insight to it, but then you went from Bard was a large company to a bigger company than once you became BD. And
Right.
so, like that's got to be a weird thing to go through. And like when I was at Covance, when Covance was acquired by LabCorp, and that was like, people asked what that was like, and it was weird. It was 2 like 30,000 person companies getting combined together. Like it's a weird thing, because I don't know if it affected my day to day personally. But regardless, I'd love to hear your insights from these different experiences you've had, and what are some of those big highlights that you pulled out.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. I will say that post MBA, I targeted GE and GE Healthcare very specifically. I was living in Wisconsin at the time. And part of the reason is the general management culture. And I wanted to develop my general management skills. And obviously the operating mechanism within GE is legendary. And so I worked with some of the most phenomenal people in some of the most complex product lines imaginable. So I just learned really quickly how to do great analysis, how to be very thorough, how to work within the system, and more importantly, how to work globally. GE starts with a global mindset, and a lot of companies are getting there today. But 15 years ago, 20 years ago, people were taking US innovation and exporting it to the world. And GE was already there with developing products in China for China, and they were developing products in Japan for Japan. And so I had the privilege of working with design centers in India and Korea and Japan and Europe, and really working globally. So really, really enjoyed that experience. And I will also say we brought some traditional ultrasound technology to non-traditional users. And so that was a great learning experience of how you take established technology to a new user base. When I came to CR Bard, it was smaller for sure than GE Healthcare, and I learned product leadership. We were not the largest medtech company, and we needed to make very specific and well-timed bets. And when we entered a category, we had to be the best. And so there's this mentality of product leadership. And so I learned a lot of skills in customer discovery and how to really understand the true unmet need and the true differentiation from your competitor that you could put in a brochure and that would be carried out in practice. And I learned a lot of my financial modeling and a lot of my quantitative stuff with Bard. That did carry over to BD. And then, I would say with BD, that experience is different. It's a bigger company, right? And so you're adapting to a new operating system. But I will say the larger company funded some projects that we couldn't, that we had proposed for years, but just based on our size could not take on. And so that just created a new aperture. So it was just a new operating system, and you learn to adapt. But I will say it was initially fairly decentralized, and so we just continued to operate as we did. And so I would just say you're always learning, you're always adapting. And so even though it was 3 big companies, there was even other changes in my roles and responsibilities and operating mechanisms and all of that stuff that you just continue to learn and continue to adapt.
And during this time, did you have some exposure to, these larger companies acquiring other technologies and companies as well?
Not directly, no.
Okay.
What I would say is we were on the buy side of several transactions.
Yeah.
So we were the acquirer. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, that's what I meant. I might ask a question
Okay. Yeah.
wrong. But I'm curious, from being in these strategics and just kind of, maybe talking a little. I think a lot of times startups are so focused on how are strategics thinking, and they'll go to different conferences, they'll be on podcasts, they get these checkpoints like, oh, they're interested in this space, oh, they're interested in this space because it adds to their bag. There's so many different philosophies there. I'm curious, just from your experience there, is it a hey, we're looking for a specific technology? Is it, oh, we want to expand into this area? Is it we're looking for healthy, profitable companies, or is it a combination of all of these? Because I sometimes think that people assume it's just one or the other, and I guess my gut would tell me that it's probably a good summary of a lot of different things, and it changes probably pretty frequently as well.
It does. Yeah. I would say that it's all of the above, and it can change over time. And so let me kind of say what I think will kind of be the bedrock
Yeah.
for everything.
Mhm.
And then there's some other variables. But I think first and foremost, it really needs to fit into the stated or at least understood strategy of the strategic. And so how does it fit within their current portfolio, or how does it extend the portfolio in the way that they want it to? I think some early stage looks at it and said, well, this would get great in XYZ portfolio. Well, if they're not expanding in that way, if they don't want to expand in that way, it doesn't matter if you think it's going to fit well there. They have to think that, right? I do think, most strategics want it to fit within a current sales call point or a current sales structure. That's not exclusive, but if it does, like that's key. I would also say, one of the other uh, the big areas is just margin expectations, right? To understand, is it accretive to their current margin profile? And there's a lot of great ways. Most of these companies are public, and you can find those through filings and things like that. So you can get a lot of intelligence, but I think, just margin profile in general is probably under misunderstood perhaps by the early stage. And the biggest advice I would give there is to have not only line of sight to COGS, but actually establish COGS at the level that's accretive to the strategic. And so there's some other things we can talk through, but I think those are some of like the baseline things that most would be looking for.
Yeah, no, super helpful. I think that's it is, yeah, what is, as you put, the bedrock, right? Of what you're trying to do and where do you start with all of these things. And honestly, I think it goes for the same as when you're pitching to investors. Different investors care about different things, even depending on the class, whether it's a family office, an angel, or a VC, or a corporate VC, or even within that subsegment, there can be different motivations for it. So, no, I love that insight and answer. Um, what has been the most rewarding thing for you as you've started this journey into a
Yeah.
little more early stage startup companies?
Yeah. I think the most rewarding thing is to be able to influence innovation at even earlier stages of the process. And so you and I chatted a little bit about this in the prep. Early stage innovation is just by nature iterative. And so you need to be okay with that. And you need to be okay with the fuzzy front end and trying hypotheses and figure things out. But ultimately, at some point, you need to build with the end in mind. And having been at the end of that journey several times, not only through product launches, but also on the buy side of transactions, you really need to be building towards that process from the beginning. And so the reward is to be able to influence that early and to help keep people on track through that process so they get the end result that they're aiming for.
Yeah, I love that. The end in mind. It's our finance team will talk about that with clients all the time when we're building out the pro formas and the different fundraising goals and the cash curve and talking about, okay, well, where do we want to go? Because that's going to influence a lot of what we do, in the next few phases. And you have to have plan A, B, C, and D because
Yeah.
sometimes what is the famous quote from Mike Tyson? Everyone has a plan until they get hit in the
Yeah.
mouth or something like that,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's startup life. You're going to
Yeah.
get hit in the face a lot, and you got to
Yeah.
figure out how to pivot and where to pivot and have those plans. And crucially, what are those value inflection points that you need to probably shift a little bit on? So yeah.
Yeah. I would also say, for me personally, having been in diagnostic imaging, procedural devices, endovascular PMA class 3,
Mhm.
all the way from the whiteboard, to the launch, just bringing that level of experience to the early stage and helping to make analogies and similarities and helping them through that thought process is, again, super rewarding because there's generally an experience that I can apply to what they're trying to solve right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great example, Brent. And I think that, the thing too, we always give the example of, and I think Devin Campbell gave it for the first time on the podcast, but it's like anytime you can go find a Sherpa to take you up Mount Everest, it's probably a good
Right.
idea, right? Because they have different
Yeah.
experiences. They've experienced different climates and different weather patterns. And that's the same thing with you, right? To be in that seat so many times from ideation all the way to the exit is just maybe you've seen something that you can draw on experience and say, hey, I don't know if this is right, but we handled it this way this time. It might work here.
Yeah.
So when we talked, you had just attended LSI, right? Did you go to LSI last
Yeah,
week?
that was last week as we record this. Yeah,
That's
last
right.
week.
That's right. So yeah, that's a great. That's my job as a host, and I forget to do that. We are recording a week after LSI. This will be released probably 3 weeks from this point, I think, based on the queue. But I'm curious, was that your first LSI trip?
It was, yeah, for
I
sure.
I I'd love to hear what you thought about it because I had been to LSI the very first year LSI had started, and then I went a few years ago, and it was just it's inspiring to be out there
It is.
because there's
Yes.
there's everyone from pre-seed, seed, ideation startups, all the way through later stage startups that are raising large capital rounds. All the major VCs and investors are there. There's corporate groups there, there's service providers there. And it's not to mention it's just in like a just incredibly beautiful area of the
Right.
world. And so I'm just curious, yeah, what was your experience
Yeah.
like? Did you leave there inspired? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I would say as somebody that is like personally invested in medtech and really dedicated my career to this, hope to have a continued long career in this. It really is about the people and the energy behind the why, because medtech is really hard. And so when you go into these environments and you see these really committed and really special people that are all trying to advance medtech forward, it's not competitive, it's absolutely collaborative. And so you have the elements that are required in order to help advance early stage innovation in this space. To your point, you have the innovators, you have the venture capital and other sources of funding, and then you have some service providers that are again just looking to move this industry forward because we've all seen the impact on it. And so, as somebody that just loves this, it was great to see. I met people that I had talked to online, but we met in person. I met new people. I learned about innovations that are inspiring to me. It is at a phenomenal venue, and so I hope to continue going. And then the last thing I would say, and I wrote a post about this. What struck me is the immense humility of the people involved. These are people that have been successful, perhaps with exits or product launches and things like that. But everybody is still coming to the table, trying to figure out this massive jigsaw puzzle and advance care for patients. And you can just really feel it there.
Yeah, love that. I'm pretty sure I saw that post and is what kind of clicked to make sure I asked that today for you about LSI because I just think it is. It's such a cool event, and they do two more of them now. They do one in Asia and Europe as well. So yeah, just a really cool event. Okay, I usually have a general question I ask of everyone at the end, but before we get there, we briefly talked about it yesterday, but I'd love to learn more only because I've just gotten into endurance sports and I was on your LinkedIn page and one of the last things it says is what is to say runner. Let me look at it real quick.
Still
It's
running.
still running. So
Yeah, still running.
yeah, I think it's interesting. It's clearly a hobby of yours.
Yeah.
I used to when I first about halfway through college, I got into powerlifting really big, and then after powerlifting, 2024 I ran my first half marathon. Then last year did a half marathon and a half Ironman, and now I'm really into triathlons. And so I
Wow.
saw the running, and I was like, I gotta ask Brent about running. So I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Running is a hobby, but also I think what I'm most curious about is like, what skills does running sharpen for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. I grew up playing all kinds of team sports. If it had a ball, I was
Mhm.
playing it, and love that. That's foundational to kind of my leadership style and just how I approach life. But as you get older and going to grad school and kind of burn the candle at both ends, running became my hobby, and you either love it or you don't, and I love it, and it's an absolute stress relief, and it helps, just kind of get my mind thinking more clearly. And there's a lot of science behind all of this. But what I would say is, what it does for me is it enforces or drives a disciplined mindset. I have to wake up at a certain time. I have to you have to go through the process. You have to make the commitment and you have to follow through. So it's a disciplined mindset, and then perseverance. Anybody that's ran, more than a mile knows there's the point where you want to quit. You do. And, there's you just got to push through. You just, you figure it out. Right. And so I think there's a lot of analogies to life. I always talk like the first mile, the first mile feeling. Nobody likes the first mile. Nobody does. But when you get to that 1.1 miles and you're in that groove, like there's just a feeling, and I don't know how to describe it, but starting Ironwood Medtech Partners has been hard. I've never done this before. And this is my first mile. And, I feel like I'm starting to hit my stride. So maybe I'm, at 1.1, but I hope to be doing this for a while. I hope to hit a stride and then, continue to help, more companies. But it requires perseverance, and it requires just a growth mindset.
Yeah, I love that. It's so funny because that I didn't do any individual sports growing up, and then powerlifting is pretty much all. I mean, you have it. There's powerlifting teams, but it's pretty much individual. It's the same thing with these races, but it is really funny. I think those team sports were foundational for me to grow and to be able to be a leader and a CEO of a company. And then I think all of these other things has equipped me to be a entrepreneur personally, and I think that's there's so many analogies with it. So yeah, I'd love to get that experience. That's awesome. Okay, here's my, I usually ask one question, but on my last interview that I did literally a couple hours ago, I asked 3 questions, and I think I'm going to pose the same 3 to you. Give me a book that you recommend people read. Fiction, nonfiction, whatever you want to do. It could be multiple if you want. This is video now, so you can see the books behind me. I enjoy reading. I want a piece of advice for not just startups, just anyone innovating in the space. And then I think the last one that I asked, I think is interesting, is we have a heavy international presence from the podcast perspective, even from a consulting perspective. We have a lot of clients of ours are overseas. What's the one thing you think they need to know if they're going to commercialize in the US? And take the premise of that, of understanding that, most of the companies we're helping just come from a drastically different healthcare system as compared to the US.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you for those questions.
Yeah.
I love these. And so the book is easy. Multipliers by Liz Wiseman.
Okay.
So as a leader of people, we all get to that place where you go from leading individuals and a group of individuals to then leading teams of teams. And I had to cross that chasm. And so Multipliers to me is the exact book that I recommend to everybody that wants to expand their leadership. The advice on innovation, I would say to embrace the fuzzy front end, embrace the iterative aspect of it, but also be very, very clear on what your decision criteria are and when you're going to reach that decision point. You can't iterate forever because then you won't have a company. And no innovation is perfect. So to the extent that you've established clear criteria, decision criteria, timelines, just embrace that front end and continue to explore, and then execute. And the international piece, I've talked to a lot of international, obviously done international, integrations and launches and things. The biggest piece of advice is that the U.S. market is by no means homogenous. There are 50 independent states. And while there's a lot of, similarities there are certainly regional differences. But even within that, there are types of hospitals. And I find that a lot of OUS companies would want to pursue academic medical centers, AMCs, as their beachhead, because that would give them credibility and whatnot. Academic medical centers are really, really difficult to penetrate. They are a long and extensive process. And because they are typically teaching to a wide variety of devices and procedures, they may try your device, but they're not going to adopt your device long term in many cases. And so it's not wrong to target academic medical centers. It's just a very narrow slice and a very difficult road to follow. And so there are many ways to go after, the US market, but it really starts with clear segmentation, targeting, and positioning to know who you're going after, to be very clear about that, and to exclude, the other 4,000 hospitals that you're not going to target, because you can quickly burn through a lot of money trying to chase, a massive system here in the US.
Super helpful. Love it. Awesome. Brent, thanks so much for doing this. We'll include a link to your LinkedIn, Ironwood's website. Thanks again for hopping on the podcast. It was super fun getting to chat with you. Hang on for 1 minute. We'll chat offline.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Freddie Coffey, Director of Marketing at Jumpstart. The Project Medtech podcast is proudly sponsored by Jumpstart Inc. Jumpstart's Trailblazer Accelerator helps Ohio's most innovative early-stage health tech startups fast-track their growth with tailored advising from serial entrepreneurs, non-dilutive funding to fuel their journey, and unrivaled access to a network of experts, resources, and investment opportunities. Whether it's improving patient outcomes, advancing digital health, or reimagining care delivery, Jumpstart provides the high-impact services and critical resources to bring big ideas to life. Learn more at jumpstartinc.org/startups.
Thank you for listening. At our core, we at Project Medtech are networkers, educators, and consultants. We meet you where you are to bring value and to create impact. We care deeply about helping medtech companies succeed right from the start, through to exit, by providing consulting and fractional services, hosting impactful industry events, and of course, sharing incredible guest insights like the ones you heard today through our podcast. Please reach out at any time if we can be of assistance. Check out our website at www.projectmedtech.com or email us at info@projectmedtech.com.